So if you can kind of introduce yourself and tell us why you're qualified for the position.
Sure. My name is Katie Crawford. I'm a junior from Flower Mound, Texas, studying communication sciences and disorders, so on the speech pathology track, and a little bit about my history and qualifications within student government. This is my second year as a senator. Last year, I was on the Campus Improvements and Affairs Committee, as well as the Diversity and Inclusion Ad Hoc. And this year, I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chair and Chaplain within Senate.
Yeah, so can you tell us about some of the bills that you sponsored and written?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess at the forefront of those would be the restructuring bills, which you guys have heard a lot about. One of my platform points, and just probably the thing I'm most passionate about, is diversity and inclusion and what that looks like, at least within our organization. I believe Senate needs to allow and actually represent a broader voice of the students instead of the given structure now, which doesn't really ensure any kind of variety of education, student experience, organization. It doesn't ensure any of that. So that's something I've been passionate about and have worked on throughout my time as a senator. And I suppose a more recent bill I've worked on, which actually was just passed a couple weeks ago, was a mentorship bill. So this is something that I hope to accomplish as internal vice president if given the opportunity, but fostering a more united community. So this bill ultimately would pair a non-incumbent with an incumbent senator to really just build community across classifications. And then tangent with that bill was an increased education of training for new senators, whether that be over a diversity training and also on how to write bills and our different governing documents. So that's some of my more recent work.
What do you think the role of student government is at Baylor, and what do you think it should be?
Sure. Our mission statement for student government is to represent the students and to enhance really their experience at Baylor. So I believe that as at least within the legislative branch for the Student Senate, we are supposed to write legislation that will um, make students' experience at Baylor better, more rich and full and fair and equal. Um, so we are kind of a more compiled voice for the students so that hopefully we can make a lasting change.
Yeah, and I know we were talking a bit about how any student can write a bill, they just need a senator to sponsor it. So can you talk a little bit about that process and how that looks?
Yeah, for sure. So currently, as senators write bills on Connect under the Student Senate organization, they get approved by the IVP, and then they have access to every single bill that's ever been written. That's either pending, that's we haven't yet seen on the floor, that's been approved or denied. So they have access to all of Senate's history from every other legislative session, and they also have access to different bill formats. So what that looks like, there's different kind of bills depending on what it's trying to accomplish. So like an SE is changing some piece of writing. So a Senate enactment changes like the Constitution, and they'll find an SE format and really literally just fill in the blanks. So bill formats start with whereas clauses, which just kind of explain the motivation behind writing the bill, why the bill is helpful or necessary, the intention behind it. And then either the therefore clause or the attached changes below the whereas statements go into the detail of what the bill is actually changing. So if it were an enactment, it would have the changes to the legislation. And then the therefore statement says, be it resolved, these changes will be sent to administration. It lists out some people so that the changes can be put into place. But as senators now would fill out a bill, they would download that and simply go through the process of filling out those different sections and then turn it in through Connect. So it's a really simple process that doesn't require too much explanation. And with students actually being allowed to do this, it doesn't entirely make sense because they're not given those documents. So even though it's in their capability to write any bill, they don't have the formatting because they haven't been approved through Connect. So my platform for student-wide accessibility towards bill writing would in essence just create a forum on the student government website that would be the exact same as Connect. So they would fill in kind of an explanation of what's the bill idea? Why is it necessary and how is it helpful? And then the change it's wanting to create. They could submit that just straight through the website, and then the IVP could pair the student with a senator to help them sponsor and bring it to the floor. So it's a relatively simple premise of just providing students an opportunity to fill out the documentation they currently don't have access to.
So we've been having a national conversation and then also a conversation on campus about racism in the past year, a little over a year now, or maybe just about a year. What is your plan to address issues of racism at Baylor and then also further representation for people of color on campus?
Sure. Um, I would just like to start in saying I'm really thankful for the attention that Baylor has put into addressing, whether it be our historical background or just the way different students, specifically of color or just a variety, have felt and been marginalized, honestly, on campus. I'm thankful that Baylor's taking the time to thoroughly respond in action. As for myself, I recognize that I am not going to, solve any of Baylor's problems necessarily single handedly, but I'm excited about the work that's begun and would be super eager to join in that change. Specifically on my end of things, I'd like to advocate for a mandatory diversity course before graduation. I think this is incredibly important and something other schools are already doing, um, because the first way to cause change is to allow the conversation. And on the broader scheme within the world, but also at Baylor, it's listening and learning and responding accordingly. So listening to students and then engaging with them. So that's something I'll be advocating for, is a mandatory course before graduation. And then also within my platform points, what I would love to do is, and I've actually been in the process of working on this with Sutton Hauser, is writing legislation to make the coalition like verified members of student government. So this is a group of students that have already been put together. They are of various backgrounds and experiences, and really right now they're functioning as a soundboard, which means they don't have any designated powers or abilities because they're not directly tied to student government. So what I'm working to do is put them into the executive branch, have ties with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee on the legislative, so that they'll have access to the budget, to actually putting action behind their voices, because that's been a really valuable group of people that are powerhouses and want to initiate change. So I would love to just help lift those voices and allow them to do more, because that is something, at least within the student government sphere, that would be incredibly beneficial for our campus.
So another big conversation that's happening, especially at Baylor right now, is about Gamma being chartered. So do you plan to advocate for Gamma's charter, and how?
Sure. I would say that for the role of internal vice president, and I'm hoping to fill, ultimately, this role is to help facilitate conversations and not to push my own agenda. So while there's certain changes I could make in a position of leadership, I've had the honor of working with the authors of that bill that you're referring to, Veronica Pinellas and Addison Knight. They both served on my Senate committee this year. So I've engaged in several conversations that have been incredibly stretching and helpful for me just as an individual, I would say. I would be eager to continue working with them, and I hope to find a solution that would um, alleviate some of the problems we're having right now. It's discouraging to see that there's a group of students that feel incredibly and are marginalized on campus. So I would be honored to just join and trying to find the best answer to this problem and the best way to move forward. Something I've engaged in this year and would be eager to continue with in finding that middle ground between administration and students.
So with COVID, student government funding was reallocated because we weren't doing in-person events. And so any in-person funding that was allocated to that got moved around. With things going back to normal-ish next semester, what is the process going to look like to, I guess, make sure that the funding that student government has is going to what's going to be most beneficial to students? Can you kind of explain that process and what your plans are?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this potential change because there's a portion that I've briefly explained through social media outlets, but this idea of repurposing Senate subcommittees to be more efficient. And one of those directly ties with how we allocate money from the SGAF, Student Government Allocation Fund. So what this usually looks like on a normal year is about $250,000 we've been given to distribute towards campus improvement or events. So in your question directly, once we return to normal and have events on campus, the normal procedure, I guess, will follow. Organizations will request and work with the senator to file for a certain amount of money, and then student government will see the bill, talk about what exactly they would be funding, and then if the bill passed, they would be given that money. Something I intend to do that would be different if I were elected would be, currently we see a lot of the same organizations being given that money because we have over 300 orgs on campus, but they don't all necessarily know that this money is for them. So in repurposing these subcommittees, I would like for the finance committee, who's in charge of seeing all of the bills in relation to the money, for the finance committee to send out university-wide updates on the remaining budget. So tri-annually, the committee chair would say, hey, everybody, this money is left and it's remaining for you. Please contact us if you would be interested in funding an event. So that's something a little bit different, which I hope will engage a wider variety of organizations so that this money can truthfully be utilized. Because like this year, this legislative session is almost over and we have a large amount of the budget remaining. So I hope that with increased communication student-wide, we'll have more variant organizations utilizing this fund that is actually intended for them.
Yeah. So beyond emails and Instagram, how will student government be more accessible to students?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this has been something we've been trying to work at how students can be involved in student government. One of those I already mentioned was through direct access towards bill writing. I think that would be a game changer on involving students. But I would say outside of that, we've been talking about just what it would look like for greater involvement within organizations. And that is, in all truthfulness, what the restructuring bill is trying to accomplish. We've been working on more unique, creative ways to accomplish that, knowing that the bill did not pass. And one of those is within the coalition. So this is kind of referring back to what I was talking about with the coalition bill I'm working on with Sutton. But one of those things are to include more students in the coalition that usually aren't interacting with student government. So these are the specific student populations that have already been mentioned in the restructuring bill. But for instance, the veteran, international, ROTC, student athletes, the list kind of goes on, but engaging those students through the coalition, and there's a couple of clauses within the bill that would do that, but actually reaching out to these offices and whether it be the specific student populations I listed or deans of different colleges, that's something I would want to charge the academic affairs committee to do, to be in direct communication with different college deans and really it's going to be more widespread direct communication through the Senate Executive Council and different committees. But hopefully that would be accomplished if this bill gets passed in the coming few weeks, probably 1 or 2 weeks.
With all of your experience in student government, what is some of the things that you've done that I guess you think have impacted Baylor's community the most?
Hmm, That's a good question. Hmm. I would say this is something that I cannot take credit for. I've been thankful to have a hand in, but just the creation of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee has been huge. This is the first year this committee has even been a thing, and I've been honored to chair that committee. But because of that, I would say a lot more students are engaged in kind of the room for growth within Student Senate, but also within our campus. And even within that, just how largely in part to y'all's help, and I would say the Lariat just getting out the word of that, um, we have seen the record high amount of senators apply and go through this election season. So there are so many more students that want to get engaged in changing our campus, and I'm largely thankful to y'all for that, but do feel like I've had a little bit of a hand in that through the diversity and inclusion and really speaking out about the restructuring bill, because that has been really a primary focus of mine throughout my 2 years as a senator.
Well, so next semester, hopefully, we'll be transitioning out of COVID. So how do you plan to prioritize COVID safety and help the transition to a normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say Baylor is responding really great towards that. I know that they've focused on just the weekly testing and making students feel comfortable and safe, like they have a place to be tested before they go home, whether their family be immunocompromised or whatever situation they're walking into. The Baylor faculty and administration have been a huge aid in making students feel comfortable. Student government specifically has worked in kind of advising the students' perspective. Recently, there was a bill to fund masks for the larger Waco community. And that has kind of been how Baylor can use its resources the student government can use its resources to help the greater good. I think really with COVID, it's going to be like a daily moving forward, um, continuing to just be open towards the advisement and towards the people that know best about our safety. I wouldn't pretend to know the correct actions for Baylor moving forward, but really wanting to lead out in following the guidance of the larger Baylor leadership and trusting that they have our best intention at heart.
So last question, how will you be seeking guidance from students on the role that you'll be playing? And then how can students expect to be able to hold you accountable?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really hope that if I were given this role, that students would feel very free and safe to come to me with whether it be obstacles, whether it be criticism in areas I can grow, that I would be receptive towards that and eager to listen. That is something that I think is at the foremost of any form of leadership, is just the recognition that we work best when we work together and that no one is above correction and guidance and help. I know that student government is lucky to have the advisement of so many faculty. And truthfully, my utmost goal in the internal advice president, I've been thinking about this a lot in this role. My utmost priority, I have like 3 things I would love to just accomplish: that my name wouldn't be made great, but that I would glorify Jesus through this, that I would be a source that causes change and longevity, and that other people would be inspired that they can make a difference too from working with me. So I hope that if given this role, I would, and I know that I would be eager to receive feedback to be a part of that, and that students are going to be heard and respected when they talk to me. So that's something I'd love to lead out in.
Well,
I hope that
thank you
answers.
so much. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you want people to know?
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Sweet. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.